Welcome, everyone, to the Super Connector, where we talk about all things related to the world of influence. Everything from sales to leadership, personal branding, networking, management, and my personal favorite, how to win friends and influence people. Today, we have a special guest, Matthieu Williams. Matthieu is a 28-year seasoned sales professional, both in and outside of high-ticket sales. He's been a sales manager, sales and leadership coach, and entrepreneur that's generated more than $1 billion in revenue and also tens of millions in high ticket sales specifically. He's a father, grandfather, husband, and a servant to all. Welcome, Matthieu. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Stephen. It's a pleasure to sit down and talk with you today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. By the way, I love your background. I love that picture right there. I think it's excellent. Great microphone too.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so yeah, let's just get started. So I'm just curious about how you got started in sales. So let's just start from the beginning. How did you first get into sales and what drew you to it?
Yeah. So, I mean, it really comes from just a family history with sales and entrepreneurship. So my father was a salesperson, has been his entire life. He's turning 70 this summer, and still working in sales, sales leadership specifically, but still doing it. So as a child, my father ran a part of our family business, which was owned and operated by my uncle Garwin, a company called McNeil's Trucking Manufacturing, which still today is the largest manufacturer of cement mixers and garbage trucks. And so my dad, for over 20 years, managed the sales of that company. And so I grew up always imagining myself working for that company. I mean, as a little boy, that's what I thought I was going to do just because my father did it. So, I aspired to do that. My uncle Garwin sold that company close to 20 years ago to a company called Oshkosh Trucks for about $600 million and a really nice exit because he was also debt free. So it wasn't meant to be to work for that company like I totally expected. But my first experience in sales came shortly after high school. I was in college pursuing both a business degree and pre-med. And I started selling vacuum cleaners door to door. And so that was my Electrolux vacuum cleaners door to door was the first gig I had. From there, which I didn't really enjoy it. I was training under some individuals that today look back and they were just trying to make a sale, but they were very, very dishonest. Yeah. And I just didn't see myself doing sales like that. So I upgraded to selling frozen meat out of the back of a truck. I can't even remember the name of that company, but I would drive around in a little refrigerated truck, stop at people's houses, knock on doors, and try to peddle meat out of the back of my truck. So that was my first two sales jobs. And then my father had some connections in the waste business, refuse collection. Obviously, he had a long standing relationship with that industry just from McNeil's. And so he made a connection with this company called Apollo Waste Industries, which is no longer around. They sold out many, many years ago. But that was my first real sales job. I was probably 21, 22 years of age at that point. And I had some great success. I wasn't very... I didn't know really how to sell yet. I mean, I honestly didn't. I was still just learning the craft, but I learned a lot. I sold some big deals. This was all on contracts. They were 3 to 5 year contracts with this company. And I sold some multi-million-dollar deals, really just because I was persistent with some people. I was good at building relationships. And so worked for them for about a year. And then I moved into telecom, sold that for a while. And then I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and decided to move back to the Northwest where I'd lived for a long time. went back to the Northwest, bartended for just a short period of time. And then I was literally bartending and a gentleman came in that I knew. And I just asked him, hey, what have you been up to? And he's like, oh, I just started a new job. And this, I asked, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm a loan officer. And I said, well, what's that? I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know what mortgage was really. I had never bought my own house or anything like that yet. And he said, yeah, I'm a loan officer. I help people get mortgages. And I was bartending. And I said, well, how much money are you making? And he's like, I made like $9,000 last month. And I'm like, $9,000? This guy doesn't have a high school diploma. And I'm like, wow, how are you making this kind of money? And I said, can you get me an interview? I'm interested in that. And so I went to work at the company he was working for, got an interview, got hired. I made like $11,000 my second month there, and stayed in that space until 2008 when the market crashed. I actually owned my own lending company for a while. I went from just being a loan officer to being a broker to owning my own brokerage. But then the crash of 2008 happened, and then I lost everything at that time. Really tough time. And then that's how I found my way into corporate America and leading sales teams. So left the mortgage industry, transitioned to a Fortune 500 company, and started off just as a salesperson, and quickly moved my way up to sales management. And so that's kind of like the first, I don't know, 6, 7 years, 8 years of my sales. It's been 20 years since then, but that's kind of the first 8 years of my experience in sales.
That's quite the experience too, to have in only 8 years. So I can only imagine what happened in the last 20, right? I'm sure that you must have had some people that you looked up to that you knew, and also some people you looked up to in sales, like popular figures. So what are some of those popular figures, like coaches or people that wrote books, that you love to follow to learn about sales?
There's a lot. Some of the greats. I've read a lot of books, and so I've followed people like Robert Kiyosaki and Grant Cardone and Robin Sharma, just Tony Robbins. I followed a lot of these guys that have had an influence. Now I can't even think of a name of one of the guys I quote all the time. Why can't I think of his name? I've read a ton of his books. It'll come to me in a minute. But there's been a lot of figures, but I think probably one of the greatest figures has been my father, as far as like a sales leader in my life, just because that's all he's ever done as well. And so I learned a lot from him. I didn't realize how hard he worked. So early on in my career, I thought I would just be a natural salesperson, a natural leader, just because I saw my father as that. I just thought like it must have been born into me. But what I didn't realize is he really worked hard to hone his craft.
Yeah.
And early on in my sales career, that was something I was missing, was the hard work. And so I did have skill. I did have the natural ability to talk with people, but yeah, probably my father is like the number one influence I've ever had in my sales career. And I talk to him almost daily today, still learning from him. But there's been a lot of influential people, even today, like individuals like Cole Gordon, Jeremy Minor. There's just countless guys that I follow today. Alex Hormozy. It's crazy today, to be honest with you, Stephen, because I didn't think it would be this way, but there's so many people that are 10, 20, 30 years younger than me now that I look at as mentors that I'm learning a ton from, which still blows my mind, but it's very, very humbling. But this new generation of entrepreneurs and business owners and salespeople are at a totally different level than I always thought. I always thought I was good, but watching these kids come up and how fast they get good at their skill, it's inspiring.
Yeah, it's so inspiring to me with some of the people that I bring on this podcast. And only a few episodes ago, there was a 17-year-old that is making $100,000 per month, scaling multiple businesses, made $35,000 in 1 month at Jeremy Miner's company, working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. That was inspiring. And you know what I really think it is now is that, people like you, that when you started, when you were 20, you had that ambition, you had that drive, but but they didn't have access at that time to all the education that was out there. Now you can simply go on YouTube and get endless education from Alex Hermosi on marketing, sales, etc. And so the people that are obsessed from a young age improve so fast. And yes, it is inspiring. Can you imagine if you had access to that much material when you started?
Yeah, it would have been a different game for sure. It would have been a lot different. Yeah, it's with the introduction of technology that's at the fingertips of everyone today. It's no wonder it is the way it is today, and how fast people increase in skill level, just because of the free coaching. And for me, I would have, we didn't even really have audiobooks. You had tapes and stuff like that when I was first starting out. Like, you had to listen to actual tapes, or eventually we had CDs, but you'd have to sit around in your car traveling, in between jobs, and you'd be listening to things like that. But they weren't as powerful as the messages are today either. Like, you really had to comb through books and books to find a few gems here and there that you could implement. And now, everything is a short, and every short you listen to, if you implement it, can have a massive impact on your month or on your business moving forward. So it's a different world.
It's pretty amazing. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to do something very interesting after this episode. I'm actually going to take the transcript. I'm going to put it into Claude, which is an AI device, and say, write an educational article based on what Matthieu was saying during this podcast. And it's going to come out with something incredible. Then I put the transcript into this program called Google Notebook LM, and it will create a 20-minute podcast of two people speaking to each other about the concepts that you're bringing across in this interview. It's absolutely incredible. And so what's interesting is how fast we can learn because of that, because of this digitization of education. So what have you seen of late as the trends in what I guess you could say younger generation are using in sales compared to what you used when you started?
Well, I mean, mostly what I used was just reading books, and that was very, very time consuming. Yeah. Even today, I mean, I still go through a lot of books, but I'm listening to them, and I've learned to listen to them at 1.5 or 2.0 speed, which you didn't have the access to do that before. Right. So everything is about speed, and learning as fast as possible. It's an incredibly competitive marketplace today, more competitive than it ever has been. And you really have to just consume as much as you possibly can and implement as much as you can. So I think that's one of the biggest differences, is just the speed at which you can consume things today versus before. Like I said, it was audio tapes. Cassette tapes. It was CDs when those came about, because CDs weren't even around when I first started selling. So it was just cassette tapes. And so now everything's on audio. And just like you said, you can literally take an audio book, print out the transcript, throw it in ChatGPT or some other sort of software and say, hey, just pull out all the key points of this. And basically, you can condense a book, even if you're going to read it, into just a few sound bites, and take what's best of that, and then move on to the next book and the next book and the next book, and just continue to glean and to scrape understanding off of that, compile that into your own understanding, and then start using it. So it's just what took years is literally taking people weeks or months to learn now. And that's the biggest change I've seen, honestly. It's just the speed at which people consume.
Yeah. And I mean, marketing has definitely changed when it comes to social media. Sales has changed. Nonetheless, they still maintain the same principles, right?
Yeah. 100%.
And so, yeah, with you being in sales and leadership for so long, you can see those principles even in the new sales styles, etc. And so, what are some of the newer people that you really love to learn from? Because I know you mentioned Jeremy Miner and also Cole. So, what are some things that you really enjoyed learning from them?
I What I've learned most from Cole is just getting to the point of things. I come from an era where sales was mostly about building relationships, and
Yeah,
again, like Cole's style of sales is to still build trust, but again, it's condensed into 30 or 45 minutes.
yeah,
Whereas initially, when I was working on very, very large deals, the process of introduction to building rapport with a client, I mean, that was taking people out to dinner and to ball games, and some of that still obviously exists in the marketplace.
yeah,
But again, everybody is moving at such a fast rate. People don't have a ton of time to build the same sort of relationships over time, because if you want to rely on building business that way in today's marketplace, somebody else is going to get there before you.
yeah,
And so you have to have different tactics. And so that's what's beautiful about like the old world sales type that I came from to now high ticket or remote selling space
yeah,
is the principles are there still, but everything, like everything else in today's world, is condensed into a short time frame. And
yeah,
so, the frameworks that like Cole teaches inside of sales, like it's all about speed. Like get to the understanding constraints inside of the business that you're talking to as fast as possible so you can present a pre-pitch and then a pitch that solves their issue. And you're able to do that in less than 45 minutes. I
yeah,
mean, that's crazy because when I think back 20 years ago or 25 years ago, I would walk into a business, try to find somebody that would be willing to talk to me. Hopefully, and there would be several levels of relationship building. I'd have to build a relationship with the receptionist and then maybe
yeah,
some low level manager, and then have to climb my ranks up by building relationship after relationship. And it would often take 6 months to get to the right person. And if you're
yeah,
really good at it, you could do it in a month or two if you were really, really good at building those relationships and finding the right people. But it's just a really lengthy process. And so your
yeah,
sales cycles are long. And it doesn't matter if it's like high ticket sales or like I have several friends that work in corporate America now in sales, like for Salesforce and other big name companies today. And even inside of their industries now, the sales cycles have shrunk substantially. Like they have so many tools like HubSpot and all these
yeah,
different AI based tools that are getting to the right person quicker. And so, again, everything is just condensed. And, Cole's a magician with that as well, just shortening time frames and getting the most out of every minute spent with a client. And the thing is the clients appreciate that too. I think it's kind of worn out the whole long process for them as well. They rather get to the root of their issues quicker so they can, because every minute wasted is revenues wasted. And that's, it's still all about bottom lines.
yeah,
So I think that's the beauty of what's happening in high ticket space. And that what's happening in high ticket space is, I think, in some ways bleeding over into other industries now, and having an impact there. And so you see this, what would you call it? Not mixing, but there's a relationship forming, I guess, between like this type of sales style and this older sales style, and you see a blending. There's a blending
yeah.
that's happening in between the two different spaces. That's positive. So
That's great. Now, have you been coached by Cole Gordon himself?
I have, yeah, I've got to spend time. I've sold on his sales team, and so have learned a great deal in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing about Cole's ecosystem. He's multimillionaire, runs a very successful business, an 8-figure business, and he's still very, very active on the
Yeah.
sales front, still doing call reviews of his salespeople today. Most people that are the CEO level are not taking that kind of interest in their company.
Yeah.
But and that's something I think that's different a lot today too, amongst especially in high ticket. Like it's the top level people are still taking an interest in individuals that are the engine of their business and sowing a lot into them to make them better, and that helps their bottom line. So yeah, to answer your question in short, yes, I've got to be personally coached by Colt.
That's awesome. And what you just mentioned there, it's possible that it has to do with passion. Like, for example, Cole Gordon, he doesn't have to review those calls for his sales professionals anymore, but he chooses
No,
to. So
no.
I truly do believe, and I'm sure you've heard this before, that what you're passionate about, you will be the most successful in. So were there times throughout your life where you realized you found what you were passionate about in what you were selling?
Um, I definitely found passion in the sales world. I don't know
Yeah.
if it was ever about the particular item I was selling,
Okay.
more so about the process. And also for me, it's always been about the people that
Yeah.
I got to work with. Um, my biggest passion has come, and I didn't realize this at first. I mean, to me, at the beginning of my sales career, it was all about money. 100%. Like I saw it as a way just to make a gob of money and to buy the things that I wanted. It was very, very self-serving at the beginning of my
Yeah.
career. And then, but and even this was self-serving. I had aspirations of climbing the ladder in the ranks. And so it was still coming from a very self-serving place because I just saw climbing the ranks as making more money. And that was
Yeah.
my mindset for early in my career. So when that came to fruition, when I finally got into leadership side, um, things started to change, and not initially. It was still very self-serving at the beginning, and because of it being very self-serving, um, it was a brutal transition for me, an awful transition from being a sole contributor to then leading salespeople. Uh, I had a lot of misconceptions about what it would be like, what was going to be needed to be successful. I just thought it would be simple. Very similar
Yeah.
to what I thought about my father. I thought I would just automatically be great at sales because my dad's good at sales. And so that same sort of mentality traveled with me into leadership. And I didn't really find a passion for sales leadership until like my third year doing it. The first 3 years was incredibly trying and awful. And many times I wanted to quit and go
Yeah.
back to just being a sole contributor, but I'm stubborn too. So I thought, well, I got to figure out how to get this right. But that's where I truly found passion in sales, was on the leadership side.
Oh,
And
really?
so,
Okay.
yeah, 100%. Um, but that passion to become a better leader has always led me, well, I shouldn't say always, but it's often led me back to being a sole contributor at times, because sometimes you have to take a step back to increase in your leadership ability.
Yeah.
And so I've done that several times throughout, my career. I've gone into leadership, stepped back into a sole contributor, back into leadership, stepped back, and done this back and forth movement. And
Yeah.
each time I've leveled up either as a contributor or as a leader. Every time I've made that stair step back and forth. But
Yeah.
yeah, but I don't know if I really ever had a true passion just for the sale itself as much as I did once I started leading people. That's where, yeah. that's where I really found my passion in this entire industry of sales.
Well, it seems to me is that you do have a lot of empathy, and you do believe in being a servant, as you had said before, a servant to all. I definitely noticed that, and that does make sense to me why you loved leadership and were more passionate about that than you were about the actual products that you were selling.
Yeah.
I can imagine through that 3-year period transitioning into leadership. You said that it was very rough. How did it build your character and change you as a person?
Well, it's a great question. Let me just tell you a story. Like the first team I ever took over. So this team was 16 people. So my first sales team was 16 people. I'd never done sales management before. So a big team, like that's a big team to manage for your first time. They had not had any leadership for 6 months. So they're on their own. They had somebody kind of babysitting them, but they had not found a leader to take over this team for 6 months. So they felt very neglected when I took them over. Very, very, they all had a chip on their shoulder. They weren't very happy. They weren't performing well. And so what's funny is I took over this team right before we did our employee evaluations with inside of this company. And so I'm their direct report, right? And so all their scores reflected on me 1 month after coming into leadership.
Yeah.
And it's funny because all that information got put up to the CEO, right? And so he's reading through all this stuff and he comes to this name, Matthieu Williams, with the lowest scores ever in history for the company as far as employee engagement. And my name's on the top as the person managing this team. And so I got pulled into a room with HR and I got put on a performance improvement plan my first month as a manager. And I'm trying to explain to them like I just took over this team, so I don't understand the performance improvement plan. They were angry before I took over. I haven't even had time to really even meet with all of them one-on-one at this point.
Yeah.
And that just went in one ear and out the other of everybody. And so I was on a performance improvement plan and had to basically track all these things and had all these goals that I had to commit to and to make sure it happened. So that was my first experience walking into a sales management role. And again, I was kind of lost on how to fix any of it. I didn't really know. And I didn't really even have a good leader above me to tell me what to do. And so I thought, well, I don't know what to do. So I'm just going to start reading books. And so I just started collecting as many books as I could. And that year I set this goal. I said, I'm going to read 100 books in a year. And most of them were leadership and self-development and John Maxwell. That's one of the books that I read a ton of. And he has this servant leadership type of mentality. And that's probably where the birth of that came from in my style of leadership. But I got through over 100 books that next year. And I learned how to serve my team. Now, the bad news is I ended up having to fire all 16 of those people that I started with over the next 2 years. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that had to do with my own inadequacies as a sales leader. And so I learned a lot through that process. But that very next year, my team was the highest performing team. And obviously our scores were much higher, a year later with the employee engagement. But, that continued, but I still didn't consider myself a very good leader. I think I ended up firing some people. I was good at picking out good sales talent. So I hired some good people that were really strong and that helped. But I still struggled with myself. I really wanted to be liked by my team. I think more than respected when I first started. And that was a dumpster fire of an idea. It was very painful.
You're only human.
Yeah. Well, what happens when you want to be liked is your team doesn't respect you. And so then they don't like you at all. They end up just disliking you, and they don't respect you. So you're not winning on any front.
Yeah.
And so I think probably about 2 years into leadership, I figured that out. I'm a slow learner sometimes. So I started more focus on doing things that would build respect from my team
Yeah.
and really leading from the front and not asking them to do anything I wasn't willing to do myself. So I spent a lot of time on the phone with them, did a ton of call reviews. I really sewed into each person, trying to figure out like what really drove each of them. And I really
Yeah.
got to know them on a very, very deep personal level and what drove them. And I learned that I couldn't manage every single person the same way.
Yeah.
So I really had to figure out what was the button I could push with each of them to drive them to their best performance, and also really genuinely figured out how to care about each person on my team.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when things really started to catch fire. And, it was a great success, 2-3 years into that sales management role, watching my team perform and outperform, other sales directors and other sales leaders that were much more experienced. But it was all because I decided, instead of being arrogant and just thinking I knew everything, to humble myself, and then just again became a servant to my team.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that I was a pushover, that that I didn't have high standards or didn't hold a high level of accountability for my team, but everybody knew that Matt actually cared about them.
Yeah.
And that just changed the whole trajectory. People wanted to win for me because of that, and it showed in their performance every day. So, anyway, I know it kind of went on a tangent there. I don't know if that answers your question or not, Stephen, but
That was great. That was great. And you've hired so many sales professionals. So what would you say are some of the top traits in them?
yeah.
Well, what would you say are some of the top traits in sales professionals that would make you decide whether to hire them or not?
What I learned is there's two type of really good salespeople. There are those that are just talented, right?
Yeah.
Um, Often the talented ones are lazy, um, just because they're good at it, and so they just it tends to make them lazy.
Yeah.
I fell into that category myself, so I can pick it out really easily because I was a lazy salesperson just because of talent at times.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were those that are just workhorses.
Yeah.
They made more calls than everybody. They just outworked everybody.
Yeah.
And so I saw high performers in both those cases, those that were just really talented, and then those that just outworked everybody.
Yeah.
And then when you combine those two, you got superstars. You got people that were just incredible. There was no limit to their success when they put hard work and talent together. But I would always pick somebody that was a hard worker over somebody that was talented. And
Yeah.
so I really enjoyed hiring green salespeople with no experience at all, but that had like a proven track record of just hard work.
Yeah.
Right. Because then I could teach them skills and I could teach them. So I always preferred somebody that was green over somebody who had a ton of experience. Somebody with a ton of experience, they might have a lot of talent, but they often were very, very difficult to manage. It was very, very difficult to get them to do things your way or the company's process. They had bad habits that were very, very difficult to break, and they were less coachable, honestly, in a lot of cases, unless they had some humility, which often really good salespeople don't have a lot of humility. So,
You don't say.
yeah. So yeah, I as I've progressed, I rather take people with 6 months or less, or even a year or less of experience, and then mold them into the type that I want. Somebody that I can see numbers on, that they make a lot of calls, or they they're willing to work 6 days a week or even 7 days a week. Not necessarily that I want people to work that much, but it tells me something about the drive in them.
Yeah.
When I see numbers like that and calendars like that, and then I'm like, okay, I can work with this. And then I try to, teach them humility and being a servant on the other side of things, and try to instill some of what I've learned in my career into them. But, some other attributes that I find super helpful are again, just somebody who's coachable. Obviously every sales leader wants somebody who's coachable. I want to see somebody that is, taking courses or reading books, or, if I go into an interview and I ask somebody like, so what are some of the books you've listened to recently? And they're like, well, they're having to think about it. I'm like, that's not a good sign. Or I say, what type of sales, coaching have you gotten? Well, I haven't got any. Yeah. Again, these are signs to me like, hey, somebody's not really taking this seriously.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for things like that. But I mean, go ahead.
It seems to me like you're looking for very positive attitudes and dependability, because that's what's going to make the difference in the long term, isn't it?
100%. Yeah. I'm not necessarily worried so much about skill at the beginning. I mean, it's helpful to have some of that, but I know there's some sales managers out there that would argue that with me, that they want people with, a ton of experience. For some offers, it's really necessary. It is. There's tougher offers out there. And so sometimes experience does matter, but high ticket's a little bit different too. Obviously, I've managed a lot more salespeople in more of a traditional corporate type of setting.
Yeah. And
you have a lot more runway to train people in that setting than you do in high ticket. So, in high ticket, some skill does matter a little bit more.
Okay. Would you say that it's more sink or swim in high ticket?
100%.
Yeah.
You've got weeks instead of months to prove yourself. Like, it's more of a pressure cooker for sure in high ticket sales.
Yeah. Well, it filters out people that can perform very quickly. And it also filters in the people that are high achievers, because I've interviewed some people on here that are so exceptional. And it's not surprising to me that they advance so fast in high ticket sales, because it seems like this profession specifically, a person can advance so fast within 3 years, So can you give me some examples of people that you've coached that you've just seen advance so fast?
Yeah. So I'll go back to corporate first, and then I'll talk about high ticket. So there's a guy named Elon. I've coached, a couple hundred people inside of corporate sales, but Elon sticks out among the rest. And I think I shared this story with you already, but he came to me with no sales background. Really, he had done nonprofit fundraising. That's sales-ish. I interviewed this guy. He was in Alaska at the time, so he needed to be in person at the company that we worked with. We had an inside sales and a field sales channel, but he was interviewing for an inside sales position. And one of the things when you're doing inside sales, very similar to high ticket, is voice. A good voice and good tonality is very, very important, right?
Yeah.
And this guy had it. He had like this. I'm talking to him on the phone. He has this radio voice, and I'm like, man, this guy's going to be money on the phones. Yeah. Like, he's just going to be great. So I hire him. I haven't even seen. I don't even know what this guy looks like. I hire him for somebody else's team. So he came in. He didn't get a lot of attention, and honestly, the leader that he was under, a good manager, but didn't have a lot of sales experience himself, even though he was a sales leader. Not a very good sales coach. Very good at managing people, but not good at teaching sales or coaching salespeople.
Yeah.
And so Elon really struggled. Never was above 80% to target. in like the first 6 months of his, maybe 6 to 8 months that he was with us at the beginning. And they were about to let him go. And I just asked him, I was like, hey, I hired him. Let me have a crack at seeing if I can save this guy, because he had a lot of good bones. He's a really hard worker. Like, one of the things that I really liked about people is just work ethic. And he had that he always showed up. He was always on time. He always made his KPIs as far as dials and all of that. Everything looked good on paper. He just could not bring in enough business.
Yeah.
And so I sat down with him and I just said, hey, what's going on, Elon? We went into a closed room and I said, hey, I'd like to keep you, and I'm going to take you onto my team. And so what's going on? And he just looked at me eye to eye and he said, Matt, I hate sales. That's what came out of his mouth. First thing in his mouth. I hate sales. Now, he had a finance degree. And he's like, I think I just need to use my degree. Is there any other opportunities with inside of this company? And I said, there's actually not. There's nothing else right now that you would fit into. I said, I'll keep my ear to the ground for you, but there's nothing right now. I said, let me ask you. I understand that you hate sales. I said, but like, what is the whole purpose? Why are you working? Like, what drives you? Like, why are you showing up every day? And he's like, well, my wife's working right now and we want to start a family. I said, okay. And we'd really like her to be able to come home and raise our kids and not have to work. But right now they weren't in a position where she could do that. Their bills were so much that she had to work. Her name was Marilee. And I said, okay, Elon, well, are you willing to change some things about what you're doing right now? And I'm asking you this because I believe, you can do better than you're doing right now, substantially better. And there's really no other type of position within inside of this company, or really in any company right now with your level of experience, where you can make enough money for your wife to come home. But you can do that in sales. No problem. Because these inside salespeople, the top inside salespeople of this company, were making $175,000 a year. And this was over 10 years ago. And I said, you can make that kind of money. I said, you just need to trust me and do what I say.
Yeah.
And I said, if you just give me a month or two, give me 60 days. And after that, if we don't turn this around, then I'll do everything I can to get you into some other part of the company. And, but I want to keep you here. You're an asset.
Yeah.
He agreed and he bought in. And so the month before, he had like 75, 80% to target before he came onto my team. That same month that I had that conversation, which is at the beginning of the month, he wrote 140% to target.
Wow.
140%. Yeah. And he never fell below 140% the rest of his tenure in sales. Never below 140%. That was the new standard. That was his new floor.
Yeah.
And, won trips to Portugal the next year and, was on the President's Club and won awards. And, that's one of my crowning achievements is seeing somebody like that go from hating sales to becoming a powerhouse in sales. And now I left that company a couple years after that. And right after I left, he was the first one that they tapped on the shoulder to take over the role of that team. And I still talk to him once in a while, check in on him, see how he's doing. He's still at that company. Now, not only is he a sales manager, but he's a director of a couple, he's over some other sales managers. Yeah. So, he's increasing. So it's a beautiful thing to watch. And that gives me a lot more passion than just making the sale. That's always, you always get your endorphins running when you make a sale, but, seeing somebody like that make a transition from hating. And I mean, the very next year, brought his wife home. They had a child. She has not worked since. She still doesn't work. Yeah. And I don't know what Elon's making now, but he's probably bringing home $250,000 a year. And his wife's at home, and I know they've got at least 2 kids right now. So
Yeah.
that just right there is the beauty of what can happen in the sales industry. There's no other profession where you can literally come in and not even have a degree and make $1 million a year without being an
Yeah.
entrepreneur. I mean, you can do it as an entrepreneur, but there's really no other profession that somebody with a high school diploma can make $1 million a year in,
Yeah.
but you can do it in sales. So
It's almost like the best sales professionals are just D students that didn't know what
yeah,
else to do and they just fell into it,
yeah,
which is interesting. Yeah. So I do want to ask a question about entrepreneurship, or at least people opening up companies and then hiring a sales team, like their first sales professionals. So do you think the bottlenecks they face are more psychological than they are strategic?
You're talking about like the business owners, the
Business
bottlenecks.
owners, yeah.
Yeah, it. So many entrepreneurs, they're control freaks
Yeah.
because the business is their baby,
Yeah.
right? There's good and bad with that. I've seen that with my wife. She owns a very, very successful business, does eight
Yeah.
figures plus a year.
Yeah.
And, but she has a hard time delegating important tasks to other people.
Yeah.
And I think that that's difficult, especially in the high ticket space for brand, owners that have started an agency or some sort of business. Hiring their first sales team is tough for them because they have a problem letting go. They've typically been closing on the offer for some time. They want to let go of it because they recognize that for them to scale and to grow, they're gonna have to do that. But they're also afraid of, am I going to be able to find the right talent? And that's an understandable concern,
Oh, yeah.
right? If they're closing at 30, 40, 50%,
Hmm.
and now they're going to put that in the hands of somebody that doesn't know the product as well as they do. So yeah, it's definitely, I mean, to answer your question, it's definitely a bottleneck for sure.
Well,
It's a
that's probably why
scary
Cole
transition.
Gordon still reviews his student sales tapes, right? Even after all that time. So that makes sense. It's the
Yeah,
obsession. They got to
100%.
protect their baby, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that also why in that industry, there's not a lot of runway for people. And this is the thing that I've noticed in high ticket versus traditional sales, especially working in Fortune 500 companies where there's billions of dollars of revenue coming
Yeah.
in. In high ticket, although I think it's difficult sometimes for people to diagnose the problem, but bad decisions in high ticket, 2 or 3 bad decisions can sink a company. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, overnight. I've seen this happen actually in high ticket. I've seen a company go from $3 million a month to $1 million a month because of poor leadership and bad decision making at the top level. So go from you know, a multiple 8-figure business to basically cracking 8 figures,
Yeah.
within just like 6 months, the turn, right? So it's not surprising that somebody like Cole would be so in tune with every part of his business because he probably understands. I'm guessing, I haven't had this conversation with him, but I'm guessing that he understands that bad hires or bad decisions can sink a company very, very quickly, even at his level. Like if he
Yeah.
makes some bad decisions, it could be very, very costly for him. Because he's seen it with other companies. So he's worked with like 4,000 different business owners in the high ticket
Yeah.
space over the last 6 years. So he's seen this time and time again. He's, not just his own business, but a bunch of different
Yeah.
businesses. So, but yeah, in corporate America, literally, this is true story. We were at the company I was working for. We were losing millions a year, and no one knew where it was going. Millions, not like, I mean, we were still profiting, but there was some leaks in the ship, and no one knew where the money was going. No one knew why we were losing money in this segment. And so without anybody prompting me, I started investigating it. I
Mhm.
found the leak. It'd been there for like 4 or 5 years and no one had bothered to search it out or find it,
Mhm.
because when you bring billions of dollars in, a few $1 million sometimes is not that big of a deal.
Okay.
but a few $1,000,000 every year ends up compounding over time,
Okay,
right?
yeah,
And so, like, by the time I found this leak, we had lost like $15 million over the course of 3 or 4 or 5 years. I can't remember exactly what it was.
yeah.
And it was something to do with how code was written when we were changing from one system to another. And somebody had just forgot to change something, a process, or implement a process, and it cost us millions of dollars. So I brought the case study to the leadership and said, "Hey, this is our problem. Let's fix it." And we did, but but it went unnoticed for years. And most of those big companies are like the Titanic. It takes, or I don't want to use the Titanic. They're like a big ship, and you move the rudder a little bit, and it takes forever for the ship to turn,
Yeah.
right? And so many things are, they can make bad decisions for 20 years before anybody notices it. They can have bad leadership for 20 years before anybody is like, oh, well, all of a sudden they're looking around and they got holes everywhere, and they're like, what happened? I'm like, well, this has been happening for 20 years. And
Yeah.
high ticket is totally different. Like one bad decision and the shit, or the plane starts heading into a nosedive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's also one of the reasons that these owners in high ticket become a bottleneck, because they're so afraid of making the wrong decision.
Okay.
And that's a beautiful thing about what Cole does too, and some other companies out there. But Cole specifically has built this beautiful hiring system to help place incredible salespeople inside of high ticket agencies, right? So it takes a lot of the guesswork out for people. It takes a lot of the worry and the fear out. There's probably still some worry and fear, but less of it. And so it
Yeah.
allows these business owners to get out of their own way and to actually scale their business.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's definitely solving a need there.
A lot of sales professionals come into interviews, oftentimes feeling a bit nervous, but they don't realize that the business owners themselves are often nervous as well, because they don't know what's going to happen if they bring you on board, right?
Yeah.
And so it's totally understandable, right? And they're very passionate about their product. So what are some of these bad decisions that a business owner for a high ticket company make that could actually sink them within only 1 month?
So high ticket still is a little bit like the wild, wild west.
Okay.
And I think you have several people that have never been business owners before.
Yeah.
Right. But they can see success very quickly in this industry. If they have the right marketing or whatever, or they've got some sales ability. You can be a good marketer or a good salesperson, and you can have some good success in this industry. But that doesn't mean that you're a good leader. Like, you can be a good salesperson, you can be a good marketer, but you may not be a good business owner. You may not be a good leader. Mm-hmm. And so, I've seen that already in this space. Great offer, great product, bad leadership.
Yeah.
Right. Very similar to me when I first took over in sales leadership. I wasn't a good leader. I had not built myself up to that. Right. I was a good salesperson, but I had no leadership experience. It was just like if I was a good salesperson and starting the business the first time, the chance of that first business succeeding is pretty low, honestly. As if you look at businesses, it's just most successful business. And Alex Ramosi talks about this. He had like multiple failures before he got his first win.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And he learned, that he learned along the way until he got his first win, and then he had some more losses, and then he's got another win after that. So, he's learning along the way. But some bad decisions are hiring the wrong salesperson, or, or trying to hire salespeople on your own without the help of a professional. Bad idea, especially in the high ticket space. Really bad idea. Yeah. Don't be looking for closers on LinkedIn or on Upwork or and nothing against people in the Philippines, but people go there for salespeople because they're trying to save money, and typically it's a bad idea. Not always. I'm sure there's some good salespeople there, but for the most part, you wanna find some people that have been trained in high ticket or have a little bit of experience at least.
Yeah.
So it's bad salespeople hires, and not building. Another bad decision that they make is they get the sales portion right, and they figure out how to sell the product, but then they don't build the right fulfillment system. They don't. And if you don't have fulfillment right, you've got a ton of sales coming in, but you don't have fulfillment right. Now all of a sudden you're getting bad reviews, which can sink a company really quickly. Right. Yeah. So that's an example. And even let's say you get to the place where you're doing 7 figures a month. Let's say you're $1 million a month offer.
Yeah.
You can hire somebody operational and you make the wrong hire there, and it can sink your company. Yeah. There's all these traps out there. Like there's multiple traps. So, I mean, and one or two mistakes and you can weather it typically, but they compound a lot more quicker in these, because all these high tickets are really, they're all startups. Yeah. Right. And so the margin for error is just so much smaller in the startup space and in the high ticket space than it is in many other industries.
Well, this is why they need sales managers like you so they can scale properly, right? Yeah. That's why they hire guys like you.
It does help. It does help. Yeah. 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 I one experience, and I won't mention names or the name of the company, but because some of these owners are not good leaders, and they had a great idea, it was a good enough idea that they were able to get it off the ground. Mm-hmm. But often, unless there's somebody like Cole or Alex Ramosi or Jeremy Miner or some of these other really well-known high ticket owners. Yeah. Right. Well, even them, they've got to hire really top talent. Even Cole, he pays his top people a ton of money because he's looking for the best to support him. And so he recognizes that he needs the very best. So in some other high ticket areas that I've worked in, I've seen some of the owners not be willing to give up some of the decision making to people, and they're not listening, and they're arrogant, and they're very, very prideful, even though they don't have a lot of experience running businesses. Yeah. And I worked with one company that even hired an outside company to come in and figure out what the problem was. And the report said the owner is the problem and they need to remove themselves from decision-making. Otherwise the company is going to continue to struggle or fail.
That's an honest company, and that's bold. Yeah. But they're doing their job.
They were doing what they were paid to do. But the thing is the owner paid them to do that and then didn't listen. So
that's great.
But that's a pretty common fault, right? Yeah. That's why most successful companies eventually hire a CEO to manage the company. Yeah. And the founder, maybe works on the board still, but they were a visionary, but they're a creative, but they don't have a true business acumen for running a successful business. So that's exactly like what you said. That's why they hire individuals like myself or, some other incredible names out there, lesser known names. There's a guy out there named Ryan Moore. Matt Moore is his brother, but they're both incredible sales leaders inside of this space. And not a lot of people know who they are, but, the companies hire them to come in and shore up places in their business. And if they listen to those guys, their businesses thrive. So
I have heard of Matt Moore, and
Yeah.
maybe one day I'll have him on here.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a good
Yeah.
guy. I'll
So
reach out to him.
yeah. So we go before we wrap up. I'd really like to ask a specific question for people that are moving into sales management, and they might just be starting. So for someone that has just recently moved into sales management, what advice can you give to them for them to succeed in that new position?
Seek out mentorship, and typically outside of your business, um, to give you an outside perspective
Mhm.
on what's going inside of the business that you're running or helping run. So, and then also just again, be humble. Um, Another story. This actually, I know a setter manager for an offer, very, very successful setter
Mhm.
manager. And this company recently, his company just hired a new sales director. The old one really was just not doing his job. They've hired a new one, and um, this new sales director comes in. He's got a lot of experience, and he sits down with my friend, who's the setter director or the outbound director, and guy asks him, tell me a little bit about your experience in high ticket. What have you done? And so my friend starts listing off some of his accolades because he was asked. He didn't offer
Yeah.
this up before. He's a pretty humble guy too. And the guy stops him like halfway through and says, "Yeah, I've done all that. And there's pretty much nothing that you're telling me that I haven't done or done better. So you're going to learn a lot from me." And so I share that story because it doesn't matter how much experience you have,
Yeah.
whether it be in sales or leadership. You need to come in with an attitude of humility and with a desire to serve the company that you're working for and the people that you're going to be leading.
Yeah.
And if you come in with that mindset, you're going to win. You're going to win. And sales leaders, I mean, like the owners too, like if you have the mindset that you're just going to help them succeed, you're not worried about your own success, but you're just there to help them succeed. So you take all the focus off yourself and you put it on, how do I help the owner? How do I help these salespeople succeed? How do I make everybody here more money? I've got to figure out the formula to that. So if you're a brand new salesperson, that should be your mindset. How do I help every single person here, the inbound director or the outbound director who's managing the setters? How do I help them? How do I help
Mhm.
him manage his team better? And not like telling him what to do, but just how do I support him? How do I support the owner? How do I support the salespeople? Don't worry about like what you're going to get paid or what you're going to make or your numbers so much as just helping everybody else hit their numbers,
Yeah.
and you get taken care of, right? And everybody wins. So
Yeah.
just I would say that's what I had to learn, early on in my career as a sales leader. Is at first I came in thinking I needed to put the spotlight on me,
Yeah.
and I worried about me. And once I learned that it was really about helping others,
Yeah.
I mean, even down to the customer, obviously. But my customer, when I was a sales leader, my customer was my salespeople. That's who I was taking care of. That's who I was servicing. That's the product I was trying to peddle to them was, success. And so, if I took care of them, they took care of the client. The client took care of the company. Then, so it was just a big circle. But I think that's the trap that people fall into, is especially when they get a little bit of success, all of a
Yeah.
sudden the spotlight gets put back on them and they become arrogant. And, um, you know, there's a, there's a principle that says pride goes before the fall. And, it's very, very true. I've experienced it several times in my own life. And so I try to steer away from pride, completely at this point,
Yeah.
and just stay humble in every situation. So. Probably a little
Great.
more lengthy answer to your question, but
That was a good answer to the question, and it's going to generate a lot of conversation. Part of the reason why I run this podcast is because people find it intriguing and it ignites discussion. But I think it's very positive discussion. And there are a number of people where the things that they hear on here, it sticks with them. And then it will make an impact on other people that they talk to in their lives. And of course, this is going to happen in management with even newer sales professionals. And so it's a win-win for everyone. That's why I call this podcast the Super Connector. I am on my way to being a master networker, and who knows, maybe a manager, entrepreneur, etc. So this is the beginning of my journey, and I really appreciate you coming on. The wisdom that you have provided is incredible, and I am going to put this transcript into AI and turn it into a podcast, and I'm going to send it over to you. You're going to be so surprised at how incredible it is. But Matthieu, thanks so much for coming on. We went over a lot of material, and that's about it. Yeah, we'll just wave goodbye to the audience. Thanks for watching, guys.
thank you so much, Stephen. Appreciate you.